Welcome to Building the Best You, a destination for you to reimagine what is possible in your life and then create it. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Jeanne Collins, and today we have Dr. Jeanne Altman on the phone, and we are going to talk about functional medicine. And this is something that I am so passionate about. And really, when I talked to Dr. Altman on the side and we talked about his passion for applying science to alternative medicine, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to have you on the show and to share this with everybody. So, Dr. Altman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to speak with like-minded individuals that are also, up on the importance of wellness and taking care of oneself and, really trying to optimize what I like to call, the health span. We talk about our lives in terms of lifespan often, which is how long we live, but really what's most important is our health span. So those are the number of healthy years we have. And that's something, in my functional medicine practice that we really try to emphasize with all of our patients is trying to optimize their health in as many ways as possible, allowing them to enjoy their lives, do the things that they love to do, play with their grandkids, go on hikes, and just enjoy the maximum amount of years as possible.
Which is beautiful. And I personally never knew. I have actually a functional medicine doctor who helps me, with my hormone health, with my gut health, with Hashimoto's, with celiac disease, all those things. But I never knew that doctors existed like you because you specialize in neurological issues and orthopedic issues, which is a whole different space. So I knew nothing about that. So could you at a really high level explain what you do?
So my background is really orthopedics and neurologic treatment, but I ended up going into functional medicine because I started to see parallels between the various bodily systems and those individual issues, be it diseases or orthopedic injuries or nerve disorders. And when you start to see those connections and you start to think of them from a functional medicine standpoint, which is essentially like systems biology, and you address it, then all of those things tend to respond much, much faster to care. My path to this field and to, ultimately the way I practice medicine now really came through personal experience. As a kid, I grew up playing ice hockey and I played some college hockey as well. And hockey's it's a physical sport. So I suffered many injuries along the way, including several concussions. I got to a point where I was playing through pain and, experiencing things like chronic pain and fatigue, and GI issues. And, no one really told me that any of these things were connected, and when you're young, a lot of these issues don't really show up on imaging or on blood work. So I kind of just pushed along and eventually I got to this tipping point after I had a major car accident and another concussion where I just could not get myself out of pain and I was really struggling. I was dealing with things like migraines and vertigo. And I saw all of these traditional doctors and every one of them told me that my tests were normal and that nothing was wrong. And, oh, your lab work is good. Your MRI is clear. Your CT scan is clear. And I just realized there was really a limit to what they could offer me. So I went on this journey of studying alternative medicine, functional medicine, and trying to figure out the root cause of my own issues. And in the process, I learned quite a bit, and it just catalyzed this constant quest for more knowledge, more understanding, just to see the big picture of how everything interacts. And then as I learned orthopedics, I started to apply those principles. And I realized that, once you apply them, healing, can become a virtual certainty as opposed to a possibility. Because if you look at all of the systems and the way they work, if you address them as a unit, as a group, you're able to help the body to repair itself. And I think that's probably the most important message I try to emphasize with all of my patients is that you are the medicine. that your
Mm.
body is capable of so many things if it's just given the right assistance, or you take care of it a little bit better, just remove a little bit of the obstacles in the way, and then literally transformations can occur. I call them miracles because to me, that's what they seem like. And it is inspiring, and it, gets me up in the morning every day.
Yes. And super powerful. I think getting people to look at their bodies in a different way and not feel helpless about their path to recovery. Because a lot of times people do go to doctors, and a lot of people end up in the functional medicine field because traditional medicine can't find anything wrong with them. And that becomes incredibly frustrating when you are in pain or when you're suffering, but yet traditional medicine is telling you that you're fine. I think that that's a lot of times why people end up in the functional medicine field, or also just have an openness to looking at things holistically, not looking at it, oh, you have back pain, so let's just look at your back. Well, that might mean you have something going on in some other part of your body. Or what I would love to talk about next is your nervous system and how important your nervous system is to overall healing and what role that plays for you and for your clients.
Absolutely. So healing doesn't happen without safety. So the nervous system needs to feel safe in order to become less inflamed, to become less overactive. And if we end up in a chronic state of, say, chronic pain or just chronic systemic inflammation, like, say, people who have autoimmune disease, then our nervous system and our immune system don't respond appropriately. And that can serve as a major barrier to healing, both in a physical sense from an injury or getting over an infection or an illness. In this area, Fairfield County, we deal with a lot of chronic Lyme cases. Lyme disease is pretty rampant in this area. In fact, Fairfield County and Westchester County have the highest concentration of Lyme cases in the country. And for that reason, I often will see patients that travel across the country to see us because there aren't specialists in their locale that deal with this type of stuff. But the reality of it is that there's a reason why those individuals are developing a chronic version of it. And that's because their nervous system and their immune system are not functioning optimally. They're ultimately not able to fight off the infection. And then it stays within their system and it continues to create trauma and inflammation and interfere with other bodily processes. So for me, the nervous system is the first thing we need to address with any patient, because if it's not on the correct page, if it's overstimulated, if people have high cortisol levels and their stress is too elevated, it places them at a huge disadvantage to respond to any treatment. Speaking of low back pain, I just had this very interesting low back patient come in to see me. She's been dealing with 25, 26 years of back issues. She has a connective tissue disorder, which affects the immune system, gave her the predisposition of having some immune system and nervous system dysregulation. And then she's had 3 back fusion surgeries that
Wow.
all led to additional inflammation and trauma and scar tissue. And recently she tried to have stem cell treatment done, which, as most of us know, stem cells can be terrific. They definitely have their place. And if they're done appropriately, they can be very beneficial in terms of repairing or even regenerating lost tissue. But as I was explaining to her, the reason there was really no effect to that treatment was that her nervous system is too upregulated. So it's not in a position to respond to that stimulus. So even if, she's given the perfect dose and the right area and all of that, if the body isn't able to take that raw material and convert it to a healing process, it's just going to go right through her. And that's basically what happened, is that she ended up with increased pain from the inflammation from the injection, and then it just wore right off.
Oh,
So for me, it's all about the planning and the staging and looking at how the whole body functions as a unit, and then planning the appropriate interventions, but making sure that we're making informed choices, educated choices, and not necessarily just trying this or trying that.
yeah, because there's a lot out there to try. And you and I were talking about that too. So before we move off nervous system, I would love for you to share a little bit, whether it be a Lyme patient or this woman with back problems, for example, because we talk about the nervous system and it's very hard for people a lot of times to conceptualize what the nervous system is. Everyone's heard of fight or flight, or most people have, let's say, but understanding what the nervous system is can be very abstract of a concept for people. So would you mind explaining a little bit of how you go about helping somebody learn how to regulate their nervous system and what it is when it isn't like, oh, here's your finger, don't bend it 90 degrees. That's really simple. But so if you could share a little bit about, how do you explain to someone what that is and how do you go about learning, I want to even say, to have a relationship with your nervous system so that you can regulate it more in a better way?
Absolutely. What I explained to these patients initially is that a lot of this is chemical. So it's not even necessarily that they like mentally are out of control. It's more that there's a hormonal imbalance. The nervous system is basically we've started to refer to it as a neuroendocrine system. Endocrine meaning hormones. So we've got stress hormones like cortisol, and then we have de-stress hormones like dopamine. And we need a balance between those in order to upregulate our nervous system. So, say, increase our heart rate, our blood pressure when we are exercising, when we're lifting something heavy, when we're doing something strenuous. But then at the same time, we need to be able to de escalate, to lower the nervous system when it's time to rest, when we are fighting off an infection, an injury, an illness, or especially when we are trying to sleep.
Hmm.
Sleep is a big thing when it comes to the nervous system. So if our nervous system is not regulated properly, we will suffer from poor sleep quality. And that compounds it itself because when we sleep, our brain heals, our body heals, our body recharges. So, like our energy and our mitochondria recharge for the next day. And if there are sleep disturbances or issues with sleep quality or even duration of sleep, that creates this imbalance that builds, and then it can lead to cumulative damage and trauma over the years. And that's something we've drawn parallels to in terms of things like neurodegenerative decline, like things like Alzheimer's and dementia, is with poor sleep quality because the brain is not given that appropriate time to relax, to repair, to clear damaged material. That damage will slowly, very slowly accumulate over time. So for me, what it is with patients in terms of nervous system is, number one, educating them how it works. And number two, utilizing neurofeedback and neurostimulation tools to appropriately balance the system and to do it more on a neurologic or a neurochemical level. And once that's achieved, then we incorporate exercises to work on nervous system control. But I want it to be more autonomous because the nervous system works without us thinking about it. So you can't necessarily learn how to meditate and just do that throughout the day, every single day, as a means for, controlling the nervous system. It's just not feasible and it's not a great strategy. What's better is to fix the way the system works as a whole on a chemical level, on a neurophysiologic level, so that you can additionally add those tools like meditation to build on it. From a physical standpoint, it's no different than someone having a significant injury, like, say, a rotator cuff tear or a meniscus tear. You can strengthen the muscles around the area and learn how to compensate, sort of work around it. But there's always going to be limitations. It's never going to be 100%. Or you can figure out a way to get that area to repair itself. And now you build strength on top of it. And now you can be as good as you were before the injury, or in some cases better, because with advanced training and specialization, you can really optimize the function of those muscles.
Got it. So I would guess that the world of supplements probably plays a role in some of that chemical healing that you just spoke about.
Yeah, it can definitely accelerate healing, but it is a huge world and there's a lot of misuse of supplements as well. So I think, for anyone out there who is doing supplementation, looking into supplements, it's important to to make informed choices and to pick supplements based on your needs. So there should be lab work and data to back it up. And there should be tracking as well. I'll use a example of a close friend of mine, as well as patient who suffers from what is something very common hormonally in men, which is a low testosterone. So typically men, in their 30s to early 40s will have a drop in testosterone, but in some cases it's too much of a drop where they start getting muscle wasting, loss of libido, fatigue, depression, significant symptoms, and restoring the appropriate levels can be tremendously beneficial for them. So he was trying some supplements over the counter that were supposed to be testosterone supplements or testosterone boosters, things like that. And we did some labs on him and they were not working at all. There was absolutely no change in his levels. So the type of supplements he was taking were not bioavailable for his system, and now we have him on the appropriate supplementation and now we'll track it. And I'm confident when we retest him next month, I'm sure his levels will have risen. It will have worked appropriately. But it just goes to show you that you have to be careful in this world, that you make sure you're taking the proper supplements, you're getting, reputable brands. Me, myself, I am not affiliated with any brands. I would rather just give the appropriate advice. Sometimes I'll suggest a few reputable brands and let the patient decide. I prefer to be unbiased in that regard and
Yeah.
to just be more of a clinician than a salesman.
No, well, that's good. I know people who used to be in that sales business, and that's a tough business to be in. So, being the one who's there to provide the education is a much easier path for you, for sure. So, I don't want to move on without making sure I double back and point out something that you said that I personally think is incredibly important. And in women's health, it's vital in women's health that you mentioned labs and blood work and the importance of that, because no two humans are the same. And so, what supplements or treatment might work for one person with one condition might not work for another person and another condition. And so it is so important, no matter what you're doing, that you have the science behind what you're doing. And that very often comes to the lab work and the importance of the lab work. And I think no one does that better than a functional medicine doctor.
Absolutely. And, you know, unfortunately, in today's day and age, some of the important labs are not covered by insurance.
Hmm.
Um, but if you're selective and careful, you can fine tune and test the things that are important. And then there are things out there that are reasonably cost. One of the things that I try to have all my patients do is something called a DEXA scan. I don't know if you're familiar, but
I'm not. I've never heard of that. What is that?
so DEXA scan, it's basically an upgrade version of a DEXA scan where it looks at your bone density, bone mineral density, but it also identifies your body composition. So it determines lean muscle mass, visceral fat, and a lot of other biomarkers that are very helpful in terms of understanding your health. And you get a very detailed, printout on how you compare to your age match norms. And then that gives us a blueprint in terms of a person's body, things that they might need to work on. It's a good way to track people, especially women, which are much more common to have things like osteoporosis, so we can track it more readily. And then for people we have who are, say, doing like weight loss, things like GLP-1s, or even just dietary changes, we can track their muscle mass to make sure that they're not losing muscle along with fat. And that's very important. The GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, all that are very popular these days. There is a minimum amount of protein and resistance training that's very important to maintain while you're doing that, or you can lose a significant amount of muscle. And that can be, that can also be harmful for your health, because muscle is protective in and of itself. It keeps you from getting injured. It absorbs energy. It helps the body function. So if you're losing a significant amount of muscle mass, that can affect you negatively, even if you've lost weight with it.
Yes, agreed. And the older you get, especially for us women out there, the more important lifting weights is in terms of building muscle mass and the whole dynamic of how that works with your hormone health, not just for osteoporosis and bone health, but, really working on building your muscles and burning calories in that way becomes more and more important. The older you get, I think, whether you're a man or a woman, I think it does become more and more important to add in strength training to your exercise
Absolutely.
routine. Yeah. So let's talk about the gut for a minute. Where does the gut come into play for you and your patients?
If patients have gut issues, we do detailed microbiome analyses to determine, where they might have deficiencies, recommend supplements accordingly. Depending on the patient, sometimes we will do things like food sensitivity testing in terms of like altering their diet. I'm a fan of testing more if possible.
Yeah.
I like to avoid things like elimination diets if we can, because they're very restrictive and they're challenging. People really don't enjoy them. I'm very much of the opinion of trying to meet patients where they're at, trying to make modest improvements that are going to help them in the long term, but also
Yes.
sustainable improvements.
Yeah.
Because you cannot live on a very limited diet the rest of your life. Eventually you're going to cave and go back to certain things. So I think it's about creating lasting lifestyle changes that people, can become accustomed to and can live with.
Yeah. That's so important. So, so important. Anything where you're really restricted, and there's a whole mental component to that too, that you want to try to avoid also. When you feel like something's off limits, many times you mentally want it even more than you would if you didn't think it was off limits. So you also have the mind body connection going on there as well, which is important too. So I have a question about grounding. You and I spoke about grounding when we talked
Yes,
before this. I would love to talk about grounding and how you help your patients with the term grounding and what that means in your world.
absolutely. So for my science world, the Earth's magnetic core has a pull at 7.83 hertz. And when we are actively grounding, we are connecting with that pull. It's also the same thing that causes gravity. So, what I try to do is utilize modalities that help people's bodies be more in tune with that. And basically, it becomes a skill like riding a bike or skiing or ice skating that they develop. And at a certain point, they're able to do it on their own without the assistance of these tools. And then it can be a very powerful technique to do really anytime they feel like they're overstressed or, upregulated. I also find it tremendously helpful in my older population. So, one of the things that's extremely common in older population patients is neuropathy or even just loss of sensation in the bottoms of their feet.
Hmm.
And that, of course, can tremendously affect their balance, safety, etc. Grounding can help restore some of that connection so that they're able to feel the ground underneath them. They're able to adapt to changes in terrain. They're able to do things more safely. In addition to having that calming nervous system effect, it also helps with balance. It helps with orientation. There's just a myriad of benefits of it. And then, like, the most recent thing I've been working on is actually incorporating it with children. So, what we have learned with children who are, they like you would call them like sensory seeking,
Hmm.
so children who need input, like, say, a weighted blanket or compression or whatever, that's grounding. That's really what you're doing a form of grounding. It's more primitive, but it's the same concept. And if you can do the actual thing of grounding with them and give them the ability to do it, now they have more control over their own bodies. And then that can be very powerful.
Yes. So when you say what you want them to actually do, are you talking about grounding mats? Are you talking about outside no shoes on? What are some practical things that you encourage your patients to try to do from a grounding perspective?
So I will utilize either FSM, which is a frequency specific microcurrent, so a microcurrent therapy, or PEMF, pulsed
Yep.
electromagnetic field therapy, as a means to help their body feel and to actively ground their body. And then once we've done that several times and they start to like understand how to do that on their own, then they can start using things like grounding mats or walking outdoors. But I think it's one of those things that a lot of people think they're doing it, but they may not really truly be doing it. There's a
Interesting.
difference between like actively grounding, where you're consciously connecting to the earth, or passively grounding, where you're just kind of feeling the heat of the ground outside, feeling the grass. And that is helpful, but it's not going to have as significant of an effect as doing it more, actively. It's, kind of the equivalent of years ago, they had those infomercials with the electrical stimulation that would make your abdominals contract.
Yes.
That's not going to build core muscle strength the same way that, doing core exercise will.
Right. Yes. Yes. Well, I am totally one of those people who has a grounding mat and I sit and I put my feet on it. And then I'll also work on my computer. So I am totally not intentionally doing anything with it other than being like, wow, I can kind of feel my hands tingling on my computer when my feet are on this grounding mat.
So you may be doing it a little bit, just even naturally, and then it's just doing a few sessions of like learning, and then you start to learn it on your own. It's no different than, yoga or Pilates or any type of, spiritual or, exercise based program.
Yeah. Well, I do have friends who use the mats at night before they go to bed, and they say it's like been a game changer for changing their sleep to lie on some of those mats before they go to sleep. So I do know people rave about that. So let's talk about sleep for a minute. Where are you? How do you feel about all these, the Aura Ring, the Apple Watch, all the things that are out there to help us track and monitor our sleep?
I'm a big fan of wearables. I think that any form of data collection is helpful. They do vary in terms of their accuracy, but their ability to detect change is quite accurate. So that's what we would call like intra-rater versus inter-rater reliability. So while the measurements may be a little bit different from device to device, a change in sleep pattern is relevant, is typically very accurate. So I think they're useful tools. There's a low barrier to entry. You can get a Fitbit for under $100 and you can start tracking these types of things and identifying patterns, identifying trends in someone's sleep, and then kind of go from there in terms of figuring out what interventions, what things might be helpful.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sleep difficulties, and this is a generalization, but there are really like two different types of sleep difficulties. So there's difficulty falling asleep, and then there's difficulty falling back to sleep.
Yes.
And they're related to two different things. So typically the falling asleep part has to do with nervous system regulation, where you're not able to calm your nervous system down. You're not able to calm your brain down enough to physically fall asleep.
Right.
And that's, by far the most common one. But the one that tends to be the most challenging, and, the one that I end up seeing more often, is the one with people falling back to sleep.
Right.
Because those are the ones that tend to be resistant to even like sleep aids or, meditation, breathing, etc. And most often that is due to cortisol. So,
Ah,
so our cortisol has a cycle that it goes through over the course of the day.
hmm.
And during the sleep wake cycle, as when we fall asleep, it gradually rises. And then depending on what time the person goes to sleep, somewhere between about 1 and 3 a.m., there's a huge drop in cortisol level. And that allows us to stay asleep.
Right.
And if people don't have that drop, then it makes it very hard for them to fall back to sleep.
We have that going on in my household. Not for me, but we have that going on in my household. I have no problem falling asleep or waking up and then falling back to sleep.
That's a good thing. It's a very good thing.
Sleep and I are really good friends, but I live with someone that cannot say that at all. And I feel terribly for him. It's really hard.
So that's where, working on the hormone levels, getting more appropriate nervous system and hormone function, can you allow a person to be able to transition between those states?
Right.
like I said, that's the one that typically ends up in my office anyway, because sleep aids tend to solve the other sleep difficulty. Although that's not a great solution either, because taking things like Ambien and other sleep aids can have harmful effects in the future.
Yeah.
Um, the one that I am a fan of, although not for long-term use, is melatonin. I think you can use melatonin as a tool to teach your body to fall asleep at a certain time.
Yeah.
And as long as you don't use it, too long term, meaning like more than 3 or 4 months straight, it's not, it should not be habit forming in the sense of having an issue.
Yeah. Well, what I love about what you just talked about is educating your patients on what's happening to their body that is causing them to either not be able to fall asleep or to wake up and then not be able to fall back to sleep. And I had no idea that there was a difference in what's going on with your body for those two things, because I think very often people are confused by that and might try one remedy when it actually isn't the right remedy for what's wrong with them. So it's just fascinating. I think it's just so interesting in trying to understand how your body is actually reacting and what's causing that. It's like you're doing what functional medicine does, which is you're getting at the root cause of why you're having trouble sleeping. Not just trying to give you Ambien so you can sleep better. It's understanding what is going on in your body that is having this reaction to sleep.
And there's always a why.
Yeah.
This course I attended, they had this great phrase. They said, you need to start looking at your symptoms as signals.
Ah,
And that's the reality of it, is that there's a reason for all of these symptoms. And once you put the pieces together, the body is so logical and so helpful. It has a language to it in terms of telling you what you need or what's wrong. And if you just take that information, you can figure out how to help yourself.
yeah. Right. So you mentioned something. I'm curious. You mentioned, a course or something. You just said, how do you decide what you're going to learn next? Because there must be so much that you can learn and read and study and do in addition to you having a life, a family, and a practice. So how do you decide what you're going to learn next?
So I think in the beginning, it was kind of patient driven.
Okay.
I would experience my background is working with complex and chronic pain patients, people who have very unique, challenging diseases, disorders, things that no one has seen or heard of.
Yeah.
So, I would take courses, read books that were based on things that I was working with. Now I think it's more just trying to further develop my understanding of various fields, various disciplines. So just kind of diving deeper into the science and the understanding of things. And then just for supplementation, I do listen to podcasts and, Substack, I think actually is really great. There's now some terrific people on Substack that post educational content. But yeah, I just try to absorb as much as I can. And then another source of learning is my colleagues.
Hmm.
You know, all of the people that I work with and professionals that I collaborate with in terms of treating patients. I try to learn from them. I ask them what they're reading, what they're learning from, to just try to get more of that global perspective on everything.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I also heard from another doctor who is on our show who's in dermatology, but similar to you, while she doesn't need to be an expert on, GLP-1s, for example, she does need to know a lot about them because they do then have an impact on your skin and they're having an impact on your hormones. She was saying that the AI is starting to become helpful in the medical profession because it helps pull information for you to give you access to research studies and information. So it's making it a little bit easier for doctors to be able to find and locate the latest information on a subject if you're seeking it out. Or do you find that's true for functional medicine too?
I do, absolutely. There is this, and actually PubMed rated them like the best AI service of 2025. There's an interface called Open Evidence
Mm, yep.
that synthesizes all of the major research publications into one AI platform. It's amazing. And I will use it to really like to track down literature on things that I'm looking into. And then
Yeah.
I will read the articles.
Right.
I
Sure.
will not have AI read the article for me,
Right.
summarize it,
Yeah.
because that's how you get into trouble, is that sometimes there are mistakes. So I think that is a danger with AI, is that, people may try to use it to, say, do their work.
Yeah.
I think it should be used as what it is, which is, it's a phenomenal tool to bring information to people's fingertips much more quickly, to create, the ability to learn things faster and to adapt to new technologies, new information that's coming out, and to stay up to date. So yeah, I use it quite a bit. And then I still do the hard work of learning it myself, so
Right.
that I'm not relying on it to do my work.
Of course, it's just exposing you to it. It's like anything else. Don't let Google diagnose your symptoms and tell you what's wrong with you.
That's right. Yep.
But it can maybe point you in some direction of some interesting articles that are published by the leaders in that field that you can go and do some research on. So it's recognizing it for what it is. So before we run out of time, what do you do for yourself to keep your mind, body, and spirit all in check in order to be the best that you can for your patients? What does your life look like?
I practice grounding myself. I try to do it at least once or twice a day. I try to live a relatively clean lifestyle, although that is hard in today's environment,
Right.
today's day and age. And that's where that same principle comes, of trying to meet people where they're at. You know, I'll give the example of what I'm doing right now. We're on a podcast. I have a Wi-Fi network. I have my cell phone nearby. I have a microphone. All of these things are giving off EMF.
Yep.
There are things that are unavoidable unless you live within a bubble. So I think really what I try to do is I try to minimize things like that, try to minimize ultra processed foods, and then also try to provide positive treatment against those things at the same time. So I use like EMF protection that I wear via either a pendant or something in my pocket to minimize the effects of it. But I
Ooh,
can't avoid it entirely.
yes. Oh, I like that.
I try to eat a diet that's primarily organic, but I can't always do that. I have young children, and sometimes the only things that are on the table are some processed foods. But I try to adhere to a healthier lifestyle.
Right.
I exercise multiple times a week. I do resistance training. I do strength training. The other thing that I do, I try to do at least 4 times a week infrared sauna
Ooh,
for
yeah.
detoxification. I think that's a great tool. So I think of it more as like, you know, trying to stack enough positive things in your favor and trying to minimize the negatives,
Perfect.
so that
Yes.
you end up with a net positive.
Yes. Which is perfect.
And I think that's a realistic thing to tell patients, in terms of lifestyle changes. I've read all different types of books on longevity and aging and nutrition. And I would say a lot of them tend to be very forceful in terms of their recommendations and, don't eat any of this, don't do that. And it's just not realistic. Most people can try to avoid those things, but they can't do it entirely. So I think coming up with something realistic for me, for how I live my life, and for my patients or any followers, I think that's the best thing to do, is to just try to aim for improvement and to build on it.
Yes. And there's a compound effect. I think we can't ignore there is a compound effect of doing all of these little positive steps compound on top of each other. And so it's also never one thing exclusively that leads to better health for us. It is a compound. You have to look at all of these things and their compound effect to helping us lead healthier, stronger, better lives. So that's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they build on one another,
Yeah.
getting into an exercise program, doing cardio, and, interval training, weight training speeds up your metabolism. It affects things like hunger. So you may not eat as much. It increases energy, use. So it helps you lose weight. And then that may affect diet. So it's all connected, as you said.
Yeah.
And, it all it takes is little changes and building on it. and then eventually you end up in a different place, a good place.
Definitely. Oh, all right. So before we go, two last questions for you. One is there anything that I did not ask you that you want to make sure you share with the audience?
I guess just going back to my prior point about education and asking questions, I think the best thing for any patient is to make sure that they understand the why of what they're going through, what their symptoms are, any of the things that they are having difficulty with. And ask their medical providers. And if they can't give you an answer, then you should find someone who can.
Right.
Because if they don't necessarily know why things are going on, then they're not looking at the bigger picture. They're not looking at the why. I had a patient recently who had an interesting story. She asked her cardiologist, "So why do I have high blood pressure?" And the cardiologist was like, "I don't know, just take the blood pressure medication." Like there wasn't
Right.
any whereas a functional medicine perspective could be, oh, well, maybe there's a little bit too much salt in your diet, or you may not be exercising enough, or there may be something in your labs that's causing high blood pressure, say cortisol or nervous system function. It was like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's not a good answer. Right. Exactly. And don't be shy about deciding that a doctor isn't the right doctor for you if you
Right.
don't feel like you're getting the answers that you need. Sometimes you have to be proactive. No one needs to be more proactive about your health than you as an individual because it's your body.
And it's not a bad thing.
Right.
You're not doing anything wrong by asking those questions. You're just advocating for yourself.
Right.
And
Exactly.
there's never anything wrong with that.
Yes. Okay. Last thing I want to know. I always ask my guests to recommend a book or books that has impacted them personally or professionally that they would like to recommend to the listeners. So what book would you like to recommend?
I would love to recommend Outlive by Peter Attia.
Ooh.
It's a phenomenal book, really talks about a lot of the grassroots thinking behind longevity medicine, tells some of his personal story. I have some colleagues that have worked with him. He's done a great job with building up this movement, and it's a great place to start in terms of learning some of the areas that you might want to study in more detail, or just even some of the questions that you may want to ask your medical providers or tests that you might want to have taken.
Perfect resource, giving people a place to start. Dr. Altman, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so fascinating. I've learned so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and I'm a huge proponent of functional medicine. So I encourage everybody, if you want to learn more, follow you on Instagram, look you up on your website. If you live locally, come visit. If you don't, still come visit. Connecticut is a beautiful place.
It is.
And the service that you're offering is really unique and your niche is really special. And so I thank you for sharing that with our audience. And thank you so much for your time on what is a very busy time of year at the end of the year. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Building the Best You. If you are ready to take a deeper dive into transforming your life, check out my Empowerment Fundamentals course on my website, houseofgermar.com. Thank you, and I will see you next week with another inspiring guest.